Right. So welcome, everybody. Ben, as folks pop in, if you'll do the admit honors, we'll keep everybody joining. Really appreciate you being here. We were laughing before, a niche topic on conflict that we know very few people ever struggle with or deal with, and are really thrilled to have Lisa Lyle here, who, among other things, is a longtime friend, but is also a gifted mediator, communicator, and many other things. And so we thought with this topic and the opportunity of having a special webinar, we would get an actual pro in the topic to lead us through, and hopefully we'll just continue to build this as we learn from you guys and learn from Lisa how we can continue to build resources and supports for all of you and the variations of conflict you're wrestling with most. I will ask, just because we very intentionally did this as a meeting instead of webinar, so that Lisa can have the opportunity to interact with some of you. If you're in a position to turn on your cameras, we would greatly appreciate that as well. We are recording today's session, and you will get a copy of the recording as follow-up. So just wanted you to know that. Don't want anybody to be surprised by that reality. So I think we'll just jump right in. Lisa, if you're ready, take the wheel and take us where we need to go.
Fantastic. Thanks, Anderson. Well, thanks for coming today, everybody. I'm already trying to advance my slide and it's not working. Let's see. I gotta do it from down there. Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to Advancing Conflict Intelligence in the Workplace. I think we can kind of all agree, right, that what we're here for is to kind of prevent conflict from intruding on a smooth working workplace and efficient dynamics. Can I get some thumbs up if that's something we all agree to? Okay, do not put your thumbs up. I'm psyching you out. No, we are not here to prevent conflict from intruding upon a smooth workplace. I'm not playing fair. What we actually are here to do is to embrace that conflict is a natural part of healthy environments, workplaces, homes, social spheres. So what we're looking for here is to develop conflict intelligence because we need conflict. Kind of what has happened largely in society is we view polls as a warning light, an indicator that something's gone wrong. Conflict is a blinking red light to us. But if we think about poles and polarity, literally the poles of the earth, we couldn't exist if those didn't kind of hold us in place. All of the manifestations of what we do, that is kind of what holds us in place, are these extremes. Day versus night gives us an opportunity to have a life and to rest, stillness and movement. We need a little of both, and it's the art of knowing how and when to navigate in between those. So I could go on and on, but the first thing that we're doing here is embracing the fact that polarity pops up, that an opinion and another opinion of seemingly different characteristics arise, gives us context to interact, develop, evolve, exist. So it's not the warning light. So we don't want to eradicate conflict, but we want to notice when we're thinking from inside the binary. We'll get a little bit more into that later, as organizations and individuals, how we can kind of get outside of just thinking, kind of trapped within that binary. So let's see if my buttons will work. So what we want to do is decide that the goals of conflict intelligence are more important to us, stronger, take precedence over the fear that we rightly have when conflict can activate all kinds of unpleasantness within us. And And so I want to start with, I'm a quote junkie, so I'm going to quote you a little bit here and there in this presentation. This is, I'm going to launch us off from George Bernard Shaw. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. Okay, so the peril here is not to base your respect of conflict or your faith in the worth of conflict in what you've experienced that's gone unsuccessfully. This is obviously culturally something we are now developing richer, more informed, more research-based conversations on and pedagogy of. So if you're respecting that there's now that life has proven to us in all its myriad forms that study and pedagogy of it is something that we all need and what can affect how things result. We're actually affecting, infinite trajectories, personal trajectories, professional trajectories, organizational trajectories, world trajectories, and I won't stop being optimistic. So knowing that, I tried to talk to them, it went horribly, and it proved to your sort of muscle memory just a little bit that you avoid conflict as a rule, or that you hate conflict as a rule. We're kind of going to have to unlearn some of that and develop some skills. So we are going to start this with just a little bit of fun. So I want to bring on two participants that I have procured. And so if I can get, I don't see if I have windows that way. I'd like to introduce you to who used to be Anderson and Ben and are now Stanley and Joel.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stanley.
Joel, great. And Stanley and Joel, I'm going to actually have to, I can't actually see the chat from my presenter mode. So I want to pop into the chat a situation. Let me see. Can I, I'm just going to have to pop out of.
That's fine.
Presenter for a second here. Apologies, guys. There's always something with the tech. So I'm going to pop something in the chat for everyone here. And then I'm going to pop right back into my presenter mode. Okay, so you're all hopefully getting that. Can you give me a nod or a thumbs up if you're getting that in the chat? Terrific. So what's going on here, if you'll read that, is a workplace situation. We have colleagues working on a project. And those colleagues are getting to a place where they have to have a meeting with the CEO and discuss their progress. And some things have unfolded, as you'll see in the chat. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite a short scene, and we're going to begin with Stanley. If you could go ahead and open that office door and begin discussing the updates to the presentation that didn't happen and what's going on from there.
Joel, wake up, man. I just checked in the Dropbox, and the presentation that we got today, we've been working on for the last 2 years, has like half the things we talked about last night that you said you were going to take care of it. We have like no time to get this ready. What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, hey, good morning to you. Just what, I was looking through all the presentations that, we were put together, and, a lot of your suggestions, some of them made sense, some of them didn't. So that's kind of actually glad that you're here. We can talk about some of those.
Man, this is not the time to start doing that. We had a conversation last night about the specific changes. I gave you a list. You said you were going to take care of them. And this morning they're not ready. This is honestly the way this whole relationship has been as long as we've worked on this project. And I don't understand why everything has to be more complicated than it really needs to be.
Well, I mean, it's funny you say that because I feel like you're making it a little bit more complicated.
I am.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I get that you want to nail this, but There's too much the details. That's why some of those changes weren't in there. I don't think our CEO needs to know all of this information.
Well, why didn't you say something about this last night? I mean, we left with a punch
Hey, I'm
list.
going to pause you there. Beautiful. All right. So what we're going to do, and thank you, acting jobs, quite nice. What we're going to do is we're going to road test this against that first quote, the misconception that the communication has already been had. And the one quick question I just want to quickly ask Stanley and Joel, did you feel any personal tension? You're not actually Stanley. You're not actually Joel. Did you feel anything in you arise?
Now my heart's still racing.
100%, yes.
Even as an observer, I started to feel tension in observing you. So to think that that was your effort at communicating about this, and then to lose faith in the process of conflict, this is what we are doing by developing a conflict intelligent workplace, is unpacking some of what happens there. So we're going to try it again in a little while, see if we have any difference in your process. Okay. So moving on, I'm going to change my view again. So the first sort of tool I want to give you is that one of the things you're going to practice as someone who is determined to be a conflict intelligent individual, a conflict intelligent leader, a conflict intelligent contributor to a team, is that conversation attention is a skill set to become more agile in, to practice actual agility in where you're putting your attention in a conversation. So I would like to present to you, you could call it the white ping pong ball if you wanted to, but what I'm going to call it is a sphere of neutrality. And I want you to have this image as a hack, as a tool, because it's the grail of conflict intelligence. Let me pop back up to the quote here and sort of explain my way back into the sphere of neutrality. Simone Weil's definition of attention is turning off your seeking thoughts, making yourself empty, open, and available to things. So poets, writers, heck, athletes, it's something about getting into that flow state. And so the practice, the muscle, the layup here is emptying yourself and getting into a perspective that's sort of it's a vantage point of perspective that's empty, open, and available. So it hasn't moved ahead. It hasn't already got a bunch of muckety muck in the middle of it. And it's somewhere to jump back to. And it's a practice to make. So I want you to record this image in your head, and I want you to call it what you want. I sometimes call it my still point. I'm going to call it the sphere of neutrality as much as I can in this presentation, but because the idea is this is a place to return to. When you notice, where is my attention? If I notice that his upper lip is sweating, I'm going back to what is this all? What all is going on here? And to a cue, the path back to this cue is this is conflict, and I need this sphere of neutrality in my attention. So what happens is in conflict that we have a lot of invitations to chaos. We have sweaty upper lips. We have people making little cracks. We have the sense that we're being manipulated. We have an outrageous sense of nervousness. We have tension flaring in our chest or a headache going on. So we need to practice also the attention to these, what I'm using here is these wiggly lines. These are the myriad invitations to chaos that are happening as conflict is presenting itself. But conflict intelligent people expect and begin to practice noticing, oh, that's a wiggly line. Oh, that's a wiggly line. For example, for my parents in the group, did any of you expect to have a baby that never fussed? Bad expectation, if so. So you have a built-in maturity that you've developed that this is a part of the process. And thus, you know how to look at those wiggly lines of chaos as part of the process, as invited and to be expected. So you say, oh, that's one of those wiggly lines, and I'm returning to my what? Yes, sphere of neutrality. So what we're going to do then is, if we're going to practice this sphere of neutrality, and I want to actually give an anecdote, is that I had a meditation teacher, and I will draw a line there in this attention practice, is he said, if your mind is wandering, so you're feeling lost in a wiggly line or an invitation to chaos, think of it as a feather on a desk, and every cause in the weather will blow that off, where your task is to gently pick it up and gently light it back on the desk. If you clamp your hand on it, you're going to destroy things. So the gesture is, this happens. And it's not a matter of counting how often you get distracted. It's a matter of returning gently to that sphere of attention. So then what I want to do next is I want to hack a little bit the two components of conflict, the polarities involved. And the first one we're going to do is ourselves, moi. And so when we think about ourselves, we have to be willing to sort of take from that sphere of neutrality what's going to be true about us, no matter who we are. Stephen Covey here is going to lead me into this one. Most people do not listen with the intent to understand. They listen with the intent to reply. I ask you to notice when that's true, because it's just pervasive in all of us. Something gets said, and in the manifestation of a conflict, there's I have a reaction to that thing, other than what's already been offered. Conflict is not exactly, it's that other idea. And so as soon as that other idea pops up, what we're doing now as a listener is using our intent to reply. We can't wait to get in that intent to reply. So one of the things we need to know about human nature is that we end up with a message we want delivered. If we can know this about ourselves from that sort of perspective of neutrality, I have a message here. I have a message here. That is okay. That is not a misstep. That is a phenomenon of conflict. You're in it. But you must be aware of, there it is. There's my message that I want delivered. And realize that we are all neurobiologically wired to want to protect ourselves. So if we're using that old polarity paradigm, I have a message other than what's happening. Your brain's telling you that the way to safety is to get that message across and to dispute or to impact or have effect on that opposing message, that opposing polarity. So hacking ourselves is watching this happen and having a little grace that that's absolutely inevitable. So that means then we just have to become more intelligent. Like the parent expecting the child to cry, we expect as a parent to get a headache and to feel cranky. So what do we do? What do we know here about conflict intelligence? I'm going to borrow from a teacher that I have had, and if you're a fan of Poetry Unbound, which is part of On Being, he runs that poetry series. And he also started a conflict resolution center in Belfast called Kornfield Center. He's a real pioneer of conflict intelligence. His quote is going to take me two slides to get through, and I want us to absorb it. The process of engaging in deep, difficult conversation is one that requires courageous hospitality. Okay, that's the beginning of the quote. Well, what do I mean here? What am I trying to say? Courageous hospitality. Hey, Siri, can you define courageous? Oh,
On it. Courageous means not deterred by danger or pain, brave.
Okay. So the first bit of this quote is, she's annoying me now. I'm having a fight with Siri. The The first part of courageous is that it's uncomfortable, that it causes pain. Our bodies are being neurobiologically triggered, and so we need to expect that. And so our point will not be to eradicate stress, but to know, okay, just as you, as a parent would, okay, here is the stress. Hey, Siri, can you define hospitality?
As a noun, hospitality means the friendly and generous reception and entertainment of guests, visitors, or strangers. Do you want to hear the remainder?
No. So hospitality, we've got already expecting pain, and then we're saying, but I welcome this process anyway. So let me start that quote over. The process of engaging in deep, difficult conversation is one that requires willingly being uncomfortable and welcoming the process. Okay. And the second half of this quote, what do we mean hospitality? Hospitality to enough hope to support insight, change, and moral reckoning. And what, Siri, define hope. Hey, Siri, define hope.
As a noun, hope means a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. Do you want to hear the next one?
No. Hope. We want something else to happen. So why are we enduring pain? And why are we welcoming this discomfort? Because we want to support change, moral reckoning, shift, improvement, as well as the hospitality to the demanding ways of conversations. And I promise this is the last time I'm going to do this. Hey, Siri, define demanding.
Demanding means of a task requiring much skill or effort. Do you want to hear the next one?
No. So requiring much skill or effort. So to back it up, we're saying we're going to be uncomfortable. We're going to welcome all of that because we really want insight, change, and moral reckoning. And the whole time we're going to have to expect and respect that it's a skill that has to be built. Demanding ways of conversation. What are the demands of conversation? Well, if we're going to hack ourselves, we need to understand that we have processes and biases that pop in before we realize it. If a student continuously bumps to the front of the line in terms of resources and attention of the professor, and the other students are starting to feel a little slighted, a little heated about her constant domination of attention, well, what's going on with those students? Probably they're having a perception, as the slide says, of what's happening. It might sound something like, what a narcissist. Why doesn't she ever back off? Doesn't she care about the rest of us? Okay, so we have a perception right off the bat. And neurobiologically, we tend towards the worst of all of our choices of interpretations. So we have a negative bias that tells us that we'll be safest if we go for the worst case scenario. And finally, problematically, we don't necessarily notice we've done that. And our assumption that that's true, we've decided that Courtney is a narcissist, which is incredibly divisive and breaks down our ability to have connected, productive communities and spaces. So what we've got to do, and this is a huge tool in the conflict intelligence realm, is we have to learn to do what's called complexify your identity. Okay. Now, what this means is we have a tendency to think of ourselves in absolutes and others in absolutes. So you may think, I'm generally a pretty nice person, or, I tend to be a really hard worker, or maybe it's negative. Maybe you're like, I always choke in social situations. But whatever those tenets you've bought on about your identity, you're telling yourself half the story. And we really tend to fasten ourselves to those as if they're sort of the canon of who we are. And anyone that challenges that or anything that challenges that is rather disruptive to our sense of well-being. But the truth is there are no absolutes in identity. You can be an incredibly deeply kind person and still do a mean thing. You can feel like you're fairly useless in your current depression, but also be wildly competent at the same time at getting things done. You can both simultaneously be absolutely capable and absolutely incapable of being loved. And all these contradictions and paradoxes are simultaneously true. So we have to, as a skill set of conflict intelligence, learn to complexify and hold the paradox of our identities, our own and others. But right now we're kind of really talking about ourselves. So we've got to notice the difference then between a perception and a fact, and not treat perceptions as facts. And so then we want to talk about the other person within the conflict situation. And what we want to do here is recognize, it's another one, I put wiggly lines in this one because it's another one of those things where we're practicing noticing the red flag with ourselves and how we're perceiving the other person. I'm gonna bet that Stanley and Joel were starting to think, what an ass, PG-13. But what we have to do is start noticing when we're contracting and other sensations where we're distancing or othering someone when they begin in our sensory experience. So what's true is that there is always, in conversation, we're always either opening, just gradually, consistently developing opening, getting more and more inclusive, or we're closing. We're always either dilating or constricting in interaction. So we have to start noticing what those cues are and get back to that sphere of neutrality where we're going, oh, that's happening with me. I'm totally getting contracted there. It's not the whole picture, and I'm talking fast, but these are things that you can kind of work with in the handout and reflect on in review of this, is that as you start to sort of play with these characteristics, you start to get better at them. So anytime that we are allowing our humanity to recede and we're noticing that sense of constriction, we're giving ourselves a flag that there's conflict intelligence to be applied here. There are skills that I am developing that I want to apply to this situation. So another piece of thinking about them, the other in the conflict, is the tendency to define an adversary. I'll go to the quote. Know that you cannot meaningfully agree until you have meaningfully disagreed. Okay, so valuing that you're really getting into the social experiment of humans interacting when you're meaningfully disagreeing, and only then when you have disagreed but found a way to hear each other are you developing connectivity and advancement of inclusivity and productivity, exchange, interpersonal development is all coming in when you know and value that you must meaningfully disagree. So we want to notice when we're defining an adversary. If we're starting to think, he's always so tight. He's, she's weak, or any kind of identifier like that. We want to have that flag come up that we're defining ourselves as in an adversarial configuration to that other person. And we also want to remember that assumptions and absolutes are divisive modalities. If I told you that student, Courtney, isn't actually necessarily a narcissist, but she's pushing really hard to knock out the end of a class because she's trying to produce something for her dying parent, we're going to think about her differently. Our assumptions just kind of fall away. So it's really important that we realize that we don't know what we don't know, and we don't know how those assumptions are dividing us. So that's, again, the genius of getting back to that sphere of neutrality. We have to appreciate that we're in a sort of a healthy social process by being in conflict with this person, and that doesn't make them necessarily skewed instantly into an adversary in our situation. So a few skills for that are non-divisive is one way to challenge assumptions is not to assume ill intent. If someone says to you when you walk into work, "Ooh, you look tired," you know, you don't want your first thought that you'll live with and stay with as an assumption is, "Thanks, punk." Not very nice. You want to think possibly it's an expression of concern. So we have to notice the patterns of assumption and learn to loosen ourselves from what we're deciding about a person in interaction. Listening, I mean, it looks like, thanks a lot, Lisa, for putting, I need to listen on a slide about conflict. But what I want you to know about listening, I'm sure you've heard of active listening. Do you know that validation ends defensiveness? Watch it happen. So active listening, when you're applying your energy to listening in such a way that you can say, so that really threw the whole thing off for you, and you really lost your footing when that person is instantly going to drop some of their defensiveness. So it seems so obvious, but it's such an intelligent tool. And I'd also like to invite you to become aware of the eternal tense. Verbiage like always and never, or even, in a father-daughter mediation I performed, like he'd say, you don't want to hear me. You don't want to hear me. And he was saying that in a way that he meant like, that's what you are, is someone who doesn't want to hear me. And so a rewrite of that might be, I so often find myself feeling like you're not hearing me. It's been happening that I haven't felt like you've been hearing me. You're taking it out of a definition that you're building the blocks around yourself, the walls that you can't get out, because it's a story that's like immovable in time. So you want to take your communications out of that eternal tense, and that means noticing when they're happening. So we're going to begin to try and use some of these tools, and we're going to use a hack to get to them. But I want you to be easy on yourselves, that this is hard for all of us, and we are learning as a society how we have to practice these skills. There is a Yale class that is the most famous taken Yale class of all times, and it's called Psychology and the Good Life. And the whole instruction of this class is how to observe your behavior and others' behavior, that you might make better choices that impact your life, your relationships, your interfaces, your communities, your organizations. So this is not just us. And so we have to give ourselves grace that we are developing, we are advancing ourselves as a more mature society by beginning. And it took this long, so we're going to take our time and we're going to work on it. One of the great tools that you are going to adapt as a conflict intelligent person and a conflict intelligent organization is you're going to learn the tool of telling the third story. Okay, so the idea here is you have to start with this third story. You have to start with not your opinion, that message you want delivered, not your idea of them, but from that neutral sphere, you're going to develop what it looks like from a bird's eye view. So let's say two roommates are fighting over whether one is keeping the place clean enough or not. Instead of, I'm so sick of coming home to the place looking like this, you don't give a damn about our space. You might try something like, it looks like we want, and have a different registration point for how this place feels good. So you're not telling the story of what you want. You're not talking about what they're doing. You're beginning, and it must begin the conversation with the perspective of the impartial third person observer in the form of a third story. So it's got to be genuine. I've gotten a lot of questions about, like, if I talk like that, they're going to think I'm full of crap. Well, the answer to that is don't be full of crap. You must come from a place of sincerity, of integrity and honesty about, like, okay, I really want to understand what this story would look like from that omniscient, impartial observer. And secondly, the third story always must end with an invitation. So that means after you say, I think we might have different, like, comfort levels of how to do this, it's got to also then follow up with an invitation. I'd really like to work at equally integrating your ideas of comfort here and my ideas of comfort here. Some form of invitation for a goal must be the next step in getting the conversation moving from there. And then you try to move into a more collaborative conversation because people's defenses are down. I have a few tools that I really espouse. I encourage you, if you're interested in any of this, to look into what motivational interviewing, what some of the skills are there. One of my great hacks of mediation that has served so many families and groups so well is a skill from motivational interviewing where we say, instead of saying, are you tired? Which I imagine would elicit a response like, well, yeah, I'm tired, kind of a certain reactivity, to actually risking stating your suggested interpretation, but with an open hand and a question mark. So instead of, are you tired? You would actually say, so you're tired. And it's possible you're wrong. They might go, no, that's not it, I'm not tired. Or they might go, yes, I'm so tired. But it's a more inviting and generative type of tool, of technology in communication. The can you help me understand can be so humble and so generative when someone is feeling like they've been defending themselves for a long time. I have a great story about innovative questions where a mediation was going terribly between inmates and a warden until on a smoke break, the mediator thought to ask the warden, what do people get wrong about your job? And the warden answered, I think this is normal. This isn't normal. This isn't how we should be interacting. And it calmed him down in a way, and it got him talking back with it got them connecting. So innovative questions, wondering about possibility aloud together. These are a few of myriad hacks. In a more immersive sessions, there's a lot of depth to go into and how to use these technologies of communication more immersively. But that's, kind of some bullet points.
Lisa, just a quick time check per your request.
Thank you. Minutes. Great. So, so what I want to do then is remind you that you can fall off in a conversation and be like, wait, I'm getting stressed. I'm getting heated. I'm losing my focus. Feel like I want to run away. It's okay to fall off in the conversation because I brought you back to some things that you recognize. You recognize those little missteps and slips and invitations to chaos. Maybe you said, well, you never complained like that before in an impulse. Okay, so what's the error there? For one thing, I just spoke in eternal tense, right? Okay, so I'm developing the skills to see that wiggly line. That was an eternal tense. I just threw in something that's actually develops divisiveness. So I can catch that, catch my breath, invite myself back to my sphere of neutrality, back to my third story or my collaborative conversation that's going on, and reboot There is no end, just like there's no end to how many times that feather gets to gently be replaced back on the table. There doesn't have to be an end to replacing your attention on that sphere of neutrality. And that develops productivity in the conflict, the willingness to return and not to count, not to have a limit on, there's not a point where it's failure. The failure is not to return. So then the practice, the layup becomes, this is conflict. That's an invitation to chaos. I need my sphere of neutrality. I need my still point. If it works better for you, if you want to picture baking bread or the smile of your child's face or puppy sneezing, whatever that is that brings you back to that sense of that openness, that non-conclusiveness, that is just an unending skill building, ever richening process. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to get us back into our two fellas, Stanley and Joel, if they could come back. Am I gonna stop share here, I think?
I'm still slightly agitated from our first interaction, so I'm
okay. So I'm gonna stop share for a minute and let you guys pop up. And so I would just like to take a take two. I'd like to start over, and I'd like just for Stanley and Joel to have just emerged from a round of practicing and investigating conflict intelligence. Some of the things that you know about yourselves, about the other, about the demands of conversation. And I'd like you to try again. So Stanley, if you could open the door and walk into Joel's office, take two.
This is a lot of pressure. All right. Hey, Joel.
Hey, Stanley.
You look tired.
Yeah, I'm just exhausted. I mean, we've been putting all this work in to get this presentation ready, and it's been really stressful. And then, yeah, I just haven't got much sleep.
So yesterday when we talked, we had kind of a punch list of things we knew we wanted to get done. I just checked the presentation, and it looked like some things were still missing. I was wondering if maybe we had a different understanding of how we were going to work on this.
Yeah, I mean, I just looked through some of those edits, and I made some of them, but I did have some questions, and I figured it'd just be easier for us to connect in person. Can you help me understand some of those changes?
Okay, now I'm running thin, Lisa. Those were my notes. I covered my notes.
Well, let's just explore. I'm curious how if Stanley and Joel really existed, how much further the conversation would have gotten. But let me ask you, Anderson and Ben, any difference in your experience in those little sound bites? Did it feel different, and how, from conversation 1 to conversation 2?
Yeah, I didn't feel the physical, like, heart palpitating kind of sweats, right? It was a lot more calmer interaction, and I felt like I was able to communicate more effectively that way.
Can you attribute that to anything that happened differently?
I think it would just be the approach, like your starting approach, not coming in guns blazing.
Yeah, I think, Lisa, I mean, it's fascinating. I feel like I'm part of a social experiment that I should have written signed my name to somehow, but I definitely did not have that same sense of, I mean, truly the first time my heart was racing, and it's not at all now. And if I had to attribute it to something, that I think I was putting perhaps that energy into picking the right words and the right approach, not toward, spinning my frustration or anger or whatever. But it was, I was clearly putting more thought into how I was approaching it. And maybe that was enough to distract whatever energy I was driving my heart racing the first time we went through it.
Yeah, so I mean, a way that I would describe that, as far as the slides we've been looking at, is that your attention went from a wiggly line, like, the minute you saw him asleep, if you're thinking, all right, punk, adversary, whereas you did not necessarily make him an adversary. Your attention went back to that neutrality vantage point, and it gave you space to communicate, not write yourself into a corner, as well as the other person in the conflict. So you could feel an actual difference, which is pretty interesting to me. I'm going to finish up with a couple of final slides and take some conversation moments here at the end. So what we want to do is value this enough to be willing to be conflict intelligent, whether anyone else is or not. We are going to improve the spaces we're in. We're going to improve our own well-being, the productivity of what needs to happen, by having kind of a vow or an intent to develop our conflict intelligence. So I love this quote. This is my last one, so thanks for bearing with me on the quote junkie. There's a particular satisfaction in really hearing someone. It's like listening to the music of the spheres. And so what I want you to think is that even if it just didn't go that well, and they didn't, you didn't get results that you were looking for, there is still the benefit of your developing your content, your intelligence. And honestly, what's going to happen, and I got a note here on like workplace stuff, is that basically if you're in a supervisor position, really likely possible side effects of developing your conflict intelligence is you're going to get people who report to you to have the guts to disagree with you, which is generative. You're going to get them to ask tough questions with each other and you, to think for themselves, offer more innovative ideas, take appropriate risks. You're developing a climate of communication and adjacent advancement by becoming more conflict intelligent. And you, in a role where you're dealing with a superior, you can actually develop a skill to find less stress, to artfully disagree with a superior and influence their opinion if in a positive way, or find other ways that you can achieve your goals. So there are such gorgeous results from taking it upon yourself to be one of the conflict intelligent people in the configuration. And I'm just ending with my business slide here. I'm excited to see if we have a few minutes of chatting, but if you're interested in, and if there are ways that you're thinking about, like how your companies, your social groups, and even you can benefit from, there's a lot of ways I work with groups, organizations, individuals on where do we go from here? How do we get depth and practice in some of these endeavors? So I invite you to take a look at any of that. All right. And with that, I would love to see if we have anybody interested in any dialogue about this for the last few minutes. Any questions, any thoughts?
If I could kick off a question, Lisa, and maybe it'll invite others, but how do you see, in the rhythm and the speed of day-to-day work and the pressure of day-to-day work, finding that zone of neutrality feels like almost step two. How do you slow down and have that moment of awareness and get out of the constant kind of reaction of in that speed of what we're all doing?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it's an ongoing endeavor to notice. I mean, what we call the wiggly lines or the invitations to chaos. Invitations to chaos are happening within you and around you. So you're developing your skill by noticing both of those. If you are driving to work and you're noticing like you're getting a little bit of a tension headache, you want to go, okay, I'm factoring that into my day, to my approach to how richly I can interface with, so I'm going to give myself the grace of this could be, this could be my physical disadvantage today. Or if, let's say you're one of the background notes I gave to Joel was that he's getting tired he's picking up a sense of arrogance from Stanley, which Stanley, you didn't know that until just now. But if that's at work with you, if you're, then the practice of noticing, like, I've been developing an opinion, I've been developing an impression. You got to hack that you've got that going on to get yourself to the sphere of neutrality. So there's a watching yourself and the others in a sort of, like I said, the goal has to be greater than all the reasons why it's easier to just stay in your bubble and say, that guy's a putz. You do get inspired forward by being very goal driven in having sort of a greater integrity developed for yourself and for your workspace and for your family and your relationships.
Lisa,
We had a question in the chat. When you find that you've slipped up and say something aloud you wish you hadn't, how do you acknowledge this in the conversation? And how do you apologize and then listen? How would you approach the inevitable that we're all going to go try this, but we're going to screw up?
Right. I love that question. Yeah. So, I mean, I think that was a misstep on my part is okay. I think that, when you're learning to develop that third story, you can also identify, maybe I pulled us a little way away from our objective here, which was the invitation piece of the third story. So, if you said, well, I've noticed you don't seem to, start early. Let's say I made that comment and then instantly regretted it. Then I could use my returning to the development of the third story and the invitation to say, but maybe I'm taking us a little off track. And that was my misstep. So, because what's important here is we both have varying ideas that we want to see how we can integrate. So let me re-guide myself back into our objective.
Great. Others, if you want to just pop in and ask a question, or if you want to pop it in the chat, I can read from the chat, whatever you're most comfortable.
Any worries about really trying to use any of this in not just an excited speaker, but like real life applications that might make your lives a little more, easy and productive, and get you out of that George Bernard Shaw thing of like, I thought we tried to talk about this, we got nowhere. So any ways that you worry that it would be hard for you or might trip you up?
Lisa, I have a question going back to the Covey quote about active listening, something that I find a challenge, and I think in conversations with people, they do also. I lose the thread of what I wanted to say by putting it aside and listening to what they're saying. So when I do finally get around to responding, it's I tell you something and then, oh shoot, I forgot what else I was thinking.
And
any tricks for dealing with that?
I really relate to that. And so I obviously am trying to offer you visuals as a kind of a tool. And so I would offer you to think of, because you have this image of the third story as sort of the central thing, that you kind of the whole time you're in a discussion, you're like, it's like if you're watching three children, I keep cheating on using parenting here, but if you're watching three children, you're keeping tabs on, there are three components to this that I am managing and wrangling. And so the central one is going to be the third story. But there is a time and a place in a collaborative conversation for each of those independent stories to get their time. So I think if you're just following it like a cartoon car, wherever the conversation's going, you can easily get distracted. But if you're kind of staying in that sphere of neutrality, you're like, I have these 3 spheres of importance in this collaboration. There's our third story. There's what I need and want, and there's what you need and want. So you can kind of keep track of them a little easier by, sort of approaching it with that sort of sense of those 3 components, that visualization.
Thank you.
Other questions? I can start picking on people. People know how I run these things virtually.
Any tips for de-escalating? So if you're in an environment where there's not just 2 participants, but more of a group conversation, discussion, and you can feel that heightened tension occurring, and maybe you're not even a participant directly in that dialogue, you're just at the table. Any tips for de-escalating and sort of bringing a conversation back to productive dialogue?
Yeah, I think if you are as you're an overseer or a witness, a concerned witness of something like that, I think a really, remember what we said about validation ends defensiveness. So you wouldn't necessarily go to each person, but you could say, gosh, there are so many important ideas crossing paths in this conversation. I'm hearing so much rich perspectives, and I really want for you all to get a chance, for there to be a container where all of them get to get heard. I think that is a way that if somebody's like taking the conversation, shepherding the conversation, in that you hear, all of you have something valid to contribute to this conversation. That's that first piece of validation. It will at least slightly dial down the heat. And of course, I don't know what the situation, there's a lot of situations, there's a lot of variables, but if you're not fully responsible for the conversation, but you're just trying to help lower the temperature, I think that acknowledging how much validity is present is really useful.
Lisa, it also sounds like when in doing that, we do some work in our leadership academies around problem solving, and our instinct and our gut to go into a scenario like that and try to solve it. Just reflecting on what you were just describing, it also perhaps is one of those intentionalities that keeps you from jumping immediately into solving the problem, yes, rather than starting with validating the 2 sides. So even as the third member of that, it slows your heartbeat down and puts you into a more intentional space.
Absolutely. And it creates a bigger container with it's okay, now we're going long-term. We're going to take our time with how to untangle this, instead of, this, tendency we want to do like a fast route where we just want to validate one person or call something out or address components of it, rather than first establish the platform of a 3-tiered conflict with a third story as the center component. So it creates space for you, yes, and for even if you're just moderating it, it creates space for you. And it definitely, I have been in the most heated, painful, family members have done terrible things to each other, and there's so much pain involved. And I can still use some of these tools as the mediator and break down walls and get conversations to happen that weren't happening, that they didn't even know they could have. But there must be that container, and that does de-escalate everybody, for that container to be appropriately constructed.
I have a quick question. Sometimes I work in HR, and you just find that you're in these really long conversations. And is there ever a way where you can feel like it's getting off track, and you were trying to work through this, but this other thing comes up, and I mean, is that just a reality? It takes hours, or sometimes I find, like, how can I facilitate this better so that instead of 3 hours, maybe this is an hour-long conversation? And it seems like it would be more about helping the group get back on track, or the individual, depending on how you do that. Do you have any tips for that?
Well, first of all, it's really normal. There are, in conflict styles, there are things like the shark and the teddy bear, or a couple of them. And so the shark thing is like, I'm taking over, we're doing it this way. And the evaluation that's happening there is, we need an immediate answer. And so that's the sort of strategy we have to default to, is we need an immediate answer. If your pet is about to run into the highway, you don't cajole them, you grab them. The teddy bear might be that we don't want to offend grandma at the Thanksgiving table, even though she's being insulting to everyone, but we accommodate. So part of the decision of how much time and space we're going to take for a conflict is, what results are we looking for? What's the impact of a particular strategy? So some things, need to be more truncated, and some things are so important that we evaluate, we're going to have to take some time for this, and we're going to have to make the space for that. So
can I just double down just to make sure that I say it the way that I heard that? What you just said was, there is a time for the shark.
There is a time for the shark.
Just so everybody heard that, right? There is a time, right? I think that's something people struggle with, right? Depending on our natural inclinations, we get in this loop because maybe we tend toward the teddy bear or whatever. But that as business people and as leaders of companies, as leaders of teams, there's absolutely a calculus for making the decision. This is a shark moment, and going with it. And
yeah, you have to know your why. You have to know, why you're doing that, and how you're benefiting everyone in that case. So, there has to be some intentionality behind it. And it's really good to know that, there are several other styles. There's a kind of a conniving fox that's like really looking for the most negotiation possible. There's a lot. So, knowing what the priorities of the conflict are, and therefore, there's never just one right one. It always relates back to the objectives.
awesome. Well, we are at time. Lisa did offer, if anybody wants to hang back for a couple of minutes and just have some time sort of in a smaller group, you're welcome to hang. We'll leave this open for the next few minutes if anybody wants to. If you need to run, we totally get it. But want to thank Lisa for her perspective and her wisdom, and for being here and supporting Shore and our portfolio, and appreciate all you guys making time to be here as well. So we'll leave this open. Like I said, if you want to stick around, please feel free to. If you need to jump, thanks for being here.
Thanks, everybody.